Hello and welcome to La Excellence Hyderabad and Bangalore. This is the daily news analysis for 4th May 2020. As usual, the articles for the day have been divided into daily editorial enrichment program and the targeted news analysis. The first part, which is the deep, consists of the editorial articles, and the rest of the important articles have been clubbed under targeted news analysis or the TNA. Now let's move forward to our discussion. The title for the first article is Pandemics Without Borders, South Asia's Evolution. The syllabus connection has been listed here for your benefit. The issue is related to the South Asian regionalism, and the dimension that this article is talking about is the evolution of a subcontinental polity. So what does the article say? This article starts out by saying that COVID-19 has led to hyper-nationalistic tendency. What is hyper-nationalism? Hyper-nationalism is basically a concept in which a country acts only and only based on its self-interest. It does not take into account the needs and the aspirations of the people around its borders. It only looks after the people inside its borders, its own citizens, for their development, for their safety, for their security. That is what it does. Some amount of nationalism is important for nations to thrive, but hyper-nationalism prevents the movement of people across the borders. It prevents people to people connect, and in fact it is an anti-globalization move. So this kind of hyper-nationalism, which is a result of COVID-19 in recent times, is not a good situation, is what this article is arguing. In this situation, this article moves forward and says you have to, if you're a nation, you have to take into account your neighbors and in South Asia, the region as such, in order to handle the situation better. And how do you do it? You have to build regional cooperation in order to handle the situation of COVID-19. And moving forward, once this COVID-19 problem dissipates, you have to make sure that you use this cooperative platform or regional framework to handle all the other problems which are common to this South Asian region. This is what the article starts out by saying. The next phenomenon which this particular article is trying to point out is the emergence of top-down rules in different nation states in South Asia. What does this particular phenomenon mean? Because COVID-19 is a nationwide and a global-wide problem, in respective nations, take any example, take the case of India. In India, the central government is basically calling the shots. The central government has become all too powerful at this point of time. It is dictating the way in which the lockdown is handled, the way in which the lockdown will be continued, and so on. The states have lesser power or lesser say in such a situation. But what the constitution envisages is the case of democratic decentralization up to the local governments. But because of COVID-19 pandemic, because of this emergency kind of situation, the central government has become all too powerful, and this is against the ethos of cooperative federalism, and it is against the ethos of the constitution, is what this article says. So this article basically so far pointed out two problems. One is the hyper-nationalistic tendencies in the South Asian region, and the second point it pointed out that within a particular territory there is an emergence of top-down rule. Now both these phenomenon are not definitely good for any nation or any particular region. So in such a situation, there are two solutions that we have. One is the external solution and the other is internal solution. So internally, power must devolve from the capital or the center to the different provincial units that are there, and in fact this power must devolve even to the grassroots level in such a way that even the local governments are empowered. So in the decision making in relation to the way in which COVID is fought, the central government should give powers to the state governments, and the state governments in turn should give powers to the local governments. This is one solution. The second solution is the external solution, in which the region as a whole has to stop its hyper-nationalist tendencies. It has to open up its borders, at least have porous borders, in order to allow for the livelihoods of the people on the borders to flourish. Because in the borders, if you seal the area completely, then those people are losing their livelihood, and this is a problem. So at least have porous borders, and instead of sealing yourself completely from your neighbor, start cooperating with your neighbor. Start working in cahoots with your neighbor in order to handle this situation. So you have to bring down your hyper-nationalist tendencies to allow porous borders, and thereby reviving the historical synergies in economy, ecology and culture. And what does this mean? South Asia, if you look at it, historically, this region has been a closely knit single unit. There used to be trade, there used to be cultural connect, all throughout the territory, starting from Afghanistan to Myanmar in the east. All this region used to be a single solidified unit. But after partition of 1947, different nation states have emerged in this particular area, especially Pakistan, India, and then Bangladesh, and so on. So these different nation states have evolved in separate silos, and this is not good. So this COVID-19 gives you an opportunity to sort this problem out. It tells you that you have to think beyond your nationalist mind, hyper nationalist mind. You have to think at a regional level. So different countries have to start cooperating, going for porous borders, start developing regional frameworks, South Asian regional framework, in order to handle situation like COVID. This is the second solution. Then the article moves forward and says that you have to use this kind of regional framework which you are supposed to evolve even after COVID-19 dissipates. And how do you use it? You have to use it for wealth creation by increasing the trade among your own countries, between Myanmar and Bangladesh, Bangladesh and India, India and Pakistan, India and Myanmar, and so on. You have to increase the trade and you have to increase the wealth creation. That is the first point. And secondly, the border areas of your country or any country will start developing if you create more connectivity routes. Especially, let us take the example of India and Bangladesh. If we start opening up the borders, people from Bangladesh will move to northeast, and northeast will move to Bangladesh, and this creates some kind of trade, more amount of wealth creation, more amount of economic activity in the northeast region. It will help the northeast region to develop in such a manner. In a similar manner, some border areas in Bangladesh will also start developing. So this kind of synergies you have to develop. And the next thing you have to do is to take care of the different kind of pollutions that are there in the South Asian region. Like for example, if you look at the South Asian region, it is plagued by several problems like plastic pollution, air pollution, and the accidents on rivers and so on. So all these things can be handled. All these things can be handled if we use this regional framework in order to handle the situation. So in essence, what the article is trying to tell is you have to build a regional framework to handle this present problem of COVID. But once the COVID problem is dissipated, you have to use this regional framework to handle all the problems that are there in the region. This is the gist of the article. Now let's move on to the next article. The title of the present article is India's Disease Surveillance System Needs a Reboot. The syllabus connection has been listed here for your benefit. The issue is related to COVID-19 and the dimension is the disease surveillance system which India has at the moment and the way in which it functions. Now let's look into the gist of what this article says. So what does this article say? In a recent press briefing, the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare has given us certain metrics. It has said that 75% of the deaths that are being caused because of COVID is in the age group of 60 years and above. This is to say that most of the people who are dying because of COVID-19 are the old people. And why is this the case is what this article starts out by arguing. Firstly, it says that these old people have pre-existing medical conditions. Like for example, even before they were affected by COVID, they had problems of diabetes, they had problems of blood pressure, they had other problems, and these problems were not managed well is what this article says. And because their pre-existing problems were not managed well, when they were affected by COVID, this created a compounded domino effect on their health, which caused a debilitating fatality rate in the country in relation to COVID when it comes to the people above 60 years of age. Next, the article moves forward and talks about the different problems in our disease surveillance system in the country. First, it talks about the problem of access. So if you have symptoms of particular disease, let's say you have fever today and then you have temperature and you have cold, flu, etc., you are supposed to go to a doctor, right? But there is no access to such clinic or any other primary healthcare center in your vicinity for most people in the country. This is the biggest problem that we have. And the second problem that we have is that even if I have access to such clinics, when I go to that particular clinic, my case is not taken seriously. The doctor gives me some kind of medicine and he says that I will be fine, and that does not happen is another problem in our disease surveillance system. Next is the problem of diagnosis and research. What does this article mean by it? So if I have certain symptoms of fever, cold, flu, or whatever symptoms I have, I first go to the doctor. What does the doctor do? The doctor takes my blood samples and he sends this blood samples to a pathology lab. And what do people in the pathology lab do? They basically look at the different symptoms that are there in my disease, and then they try to categorize that particular disease based on the knowledge they have. Now, even if this disease is totally new, even if the symptoms in this particular disease is totally new, instead of classifying it as a new disease, they start identifying with some other disease which they know. Means if they don't know what the new disease is, they identify with something that is there. So if a patient comes with COVID and he is not, and the person who diagnoses the disease does not know that this is COVID, he identifies it with flu instead of calling it as a new disease. This is a problem, because if you don't identify the presence of a new disease, how will the community get to know? For the community, for the people, for the community of medical practitioners and medical professionals to know about an existing problem, it has to be identified as a problem, right? So this misdiagnosis by pathology lab is another problem. And the next is the problem of scientific research. And what does this problem entail? It means if a new disease gets characterized by the pathology labs of different parts of the country, this new disease is not given adequate attention, because this new disease might not generate me benefits karke no pharmaceutical companies takes in the plunge to develop medicine or vaccine for that particular disease. So they only focus on famous diseases like diabetes, blood pressure, and so on, instead of focusing on these new diseases which could later affect the whole country in a negative manner. So they don't take any precautionary measures. So this is another problem which is related to diagnosis. So in such a situation, we have come to a toxic place where everybody starts focusing on the disease only when this disease affects a large significant section of the population. And if it affects only a small part of the population, nobody takes into account this particular disease and nobody puts in enough focus to handle that disease. These are the problems of our disease surveillance system, and these are the problems that we have to solve, is what this article says. Now let's move on to the next article. So the title of the present article is BRICS against COVID-19. The syllabus connection has been listed here for your benefit. The issue is related to COVID-19 and the dimension is the role of BRICS in the containing of the spread of COVID-19. So in order to understand the situation better, we need to have a brief background about BRICS as such, and then we also have to understand what New Development Bank is. So what is BRICS? BRICS is basically a multilateral grouping consisting of certain countries. What are these countries? Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. South Africa, of course, joined this grouping after some time. It was not an initial member. So this grouping came into existence. What was the motive of this particular group? The motive of this particular group is to pose a counterweight to the existing dominance of the Bretton Woods system. That is, before BRICS came into existence, the whole world architecture, the world financial architecture was dominated by certain organizations like World Bank and IMF. And this kind of dominance was not liked by these emerging economies like Brazil, Russia, India, and China, and so on. So these people came together and came up with this grouping called BRICS. So they have begun this grouping called BRICS. So what was their agenda? Their agenda was regional development, South-South cooperation, infrastructural development, and development of economies of these emerging economies. So they basically pulled in their resources. First thing, they talked to themselves, liaisoned among themselves, and started evolving better policies and better practices in order to improve economically and internationally. So that was one of the reasons why BRICS came into existence. And South Africa became a member of BRICS only in December 2010 officially, and it was admitted as a member in 2009 itself. right? So the next is the idea of new development bank. What is this new development bank? Its headquarters are there in Shanghai. It is an important prelims related bit. So what is this new development bank? So we talked about how the Bretton Woods system was basically dominating the financial architecture of the world, right? So in order to pose a counterweight, it is not sufficient for these people to come together as a group and meet every year annually at a particular summit. They need to have some financial weight, and this financial weight is possible if they have a bank, and this bank is the New Development Bank. This New Development Bank was set up by the BRICS countries in order to call for regional development, in order to provide for infrastructural growth and other kinds of economic development in these particular emerging economies. That is the motive of NDB, and its headquarters are in Shanghai. This is something that we have to know. So what does this article tell us? This article basically tells us that this BRICS grouping is trying to move forward to handle the situation of COVID effectively. So when this COVID has started spreading, the BRICS grouping has come together. They have announced a humanitarian relief, and it is being launched in order to handle the situation better. In addition to this, the New Development Bank, which is there, it is trying to come up with a financial project in order to rehabilitate people and economies as such who have been affected by COVID-19. So BRICS and New Development Bank have basically paved a way to handle the situation of COVID-19 better, is what the article says. And then the article moves forward and talks about what else can be done by this BRICS grouping in order to handle this COVID pandemic in a better manner. So the article says that BRICS countries have to not just liaison among themselves as a group, they also have to talk to the World Health Organization. And they also have to talk to countries in Europe, because countries in Europe have great experience with COVID, especially because they were the biggest victims of COVID. If you look at Spain, Italy, etc., the number of people who were dying there, the number of people who were getting infected there was very high. So these people have better experience with COVID in terms of the fact that they were the victims. So this BRICS grouping has to talk to World Health Organization, it has to talk to the countries in Europe in order to develop strategies to handle the situation better. And also it has to launch a relief package, which we call it as a humanitarian assistance and disaster relief response, and this has to be steamrolled in order to make the benefits reach the end consumer in an effective manner, in order to help the people who are affected by COVID, in order to help the economies which are affected by COVID. So this is what the article says. Now let's move on to the next article. The title of the present article is Economic Recovery May Take Over a Year, says the Confederation of Indian Industry, or the CII. The syllabus connection has been listed here for your benefit. The issue is COVID-19 lockdown, and the dimension is economic impact of this particular lockdown. Let's move on to the discussion. So this Confederation of Indian Industry has basically done a research. It has talked to about 300 odd CEOs in the country, and it talked about the economic recovery and the time it takes for the economy to recover from this particular lockdown phase, from this particular contraction phase. These CEOs have basically said that the situation is really grim, and it can take as high as 1 year for the economy to start recovering. They started talking about the losses of job that is expected because of this lockdown, and the next important problem that these people were facing is the problem of lockdown. The total shutdown of all the industrial complexes is causing a problem, and even if in certain areas these industries were working after the relaxed norms of lockdown, they were not able to move their goods from one place to another place because the supply and distribution chains are not adequately recovered. So these are the two important problems that have been pointed out in the survey of the Confederation of Indian Industries. And in such a situation, the Confederation of Indian Industries has said that you have to take certain measures in order to improve the situation in the economy. So what are these measures? The first measure is to remove lockdown and go for relaxed restrictions. Like for example, instead of going for a complete shutdown or a complete lockdown, you have to allow some kind of activity in most areas in the country for the economy to recover. That is the first thing. And second is tweaking the idea of red zone. Currently what is happening is the districts are divided into red zones, orange zones and green zones, right? So instead of doing it, if you look at a red zone and in that particular red zone identify subzones which are of more danger, and you have to identify them as red zones, and rest of the area has to be opened up for economic activity. So this essentially means that you have to decrease the size of the red zones in order to handle the situation better. That is the second solution that has been given by this particular Confederation of Indian Industry. And this is the gist of the article. Now let's move on to the next article. The title of the present article is Saudi Investments in India on Track Despite Economic Downturn. The syllabus connection has been listed here for your benefit. Issue is India-Saudi relations and the dimension is related to bilateral investment. Now let's move on to the gist of the article. So before understanding the highlights of the article, let us have a background about India-Saudi relationships. Saudi Arabia has been a strategic partner of the country. It has been a strategic partner of India since the signing of Riyadh Declaration in 2010. Before 2010, what used to be the relationship with Saudi Arabia? The relationship with Middle East as such used to be divided between Israel, Gulf countries and Iran. But post 2010, post Riyadh Declaration, the situation has changed and Saudi Arabia has become a strategic partner. That is one part of the background. Next is, it is currently India's second largest supplier of crude oil. It has also a major role in development of India's strategic petroleum reserves. So these are two important facts which are related to Saudi-India relationship. As we all know, India imports most of its crude oil from abroad. 80% of its oil needs are met from outside. And among the different countries that supply crude oil to India, Saudi Arabia is the second largest supplier of crude oil. And what is the kind of trade India has with Saudi Arabia? India's fourth largest trading partner is Saudi Arabia. In fact, in 2018 and 19, the bilateral trade was to the tune of about $34 billion. So this is some background about India-Saudi relationship, and now we will look into what this article is trying to tell us. Now, because of COVID-19, there has been a lockdown in most countries, because of which the fuel demand in different countries has decreased. Now, what will happen if the fuel demand is decreasing? In such a situation, the oil-based economies are going to take a loss. Yes, all those countries like in the Gulf region who are basically exporting oil will now face losses. Why? Because nobody is asking for their oil anymore, because nobody is using vehicles anymore. They are all under lockdown. So in such a situation, the price has been dropping by about 50% in terms of oil revenues in Saudi Arabia and especially in the Gulf countries. Now, in such a situation, will Saudi Arabia be able to invest in India is the question India has been having. And why do we have this question? This is because last year itself, Saudi Arabia has said that it is going to invest in India in a big manner. In fact, it wanted to invest in India to the tune of $100 billion. In what? In different areas, in normal infrastructure, in oil-based infrastructure. In fact, there were proposed investments to be made in a greenfield refinery project in Raigarh in Maharashtra. In Maharashtra, in Raigarh, a greenfield refinery project was supposed to be set up by Saudi Arabia. Like this, Saudi Arabia wanted to invest in different parts of our economy. Now, because of COVID-19 and economic downturn, everybody started having a question whether Saudi Arabia will be able to continue to invest in India. This doubt has been dissipated by Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has said, look, we are going through trouble, but it is fine. We will continue to invest in India. So this is the highlight of this particular article. So this is basically an example of a situation in which countries are cooperating, countries are going forward with investment despite health pandemics. And this should be seen as a template in which different countries should engage with themselves. This is the gist of the article. Now let's move on to the next article. So the title of the present article is Tripura Groups Oppose Settlement of Brus. The syllabus connection has been listed here for your benefit. The issue is ethnic conflicts in Tripura and the dimension is Brus. Now let's move on to the gist of the article. So who are these Brute tribes? Brute tribes are people majorly belonging to Mizoram, but because of ethnic violence in Mizoram, these people were forced to leave their homes in Mizoram. Now they are living in different kinds of refugee camps, especially in Tripura, and in order to solve their problems, an agreement was signed. An agreement was signed between the government of India, the government of Mizoram and Tripura, and Mizoram such that these people will be rehabilitated. What was the decision? The Mizoram government would ensure the security of all the repatriated refugees. That is, these Bru tribes who are living in refugee camps in Tripura will be allowed to go back to Mizoram, right? To go back to Mizoram in some way, and some people will be continuing to stay in Tripura. This is the kind of agreement that has been reached. But this agreement is not being accepted by different communities, is what this article is trying to tell us. While the day-to-day commentary related to this particular agreement is not relevant for our exam, the concept of Riangs, where the Bru tribes are present, as in terms of geographical spread, that is important for our exam. So what is the geographical spread of these Bru tribes or Riang tribes? They basically exist in northeastern states of Tripura, Assam, Manipur and Mizoram. This much is sufficient. Now let's move on to the next article. So before we move on to the next article, we first look at the prelims practice question that has been given here. Bru tribes settlement agreement was signed between which of these two states? We have just seen in the article that it was signed between Tripura and Mizoram. So option A is the right answer. So the title of the present article is India tried to persuade Pak to free Jadhav. Here we are talking about Kulbhushan Jadhav. The syllabus connection has been listed here. The issue is Kulbhushan Jadhav case and dimension is related to the back channel negotiations that happened between India and Pak over his release. So this particular article does not have much value addition in terms of mains answer writing or in relation to prelims. There are certain facts that we have to discuss. We'll talk about them. So what is this Kulbhushan Jadhav case? This Kulbhushan Jadhav case was basically related to the person. He is our Navy personnel who has been arrested by Pakistan on the allegation of espionage. So Pakistan has said that Mr. Kulbhushan Jadhav is an Indian spy, and under the charges of espionage and terrorism, he was basically sentenced to death. In such a situation, India has done what? India has basically asked for consular access, because it is a matter of right. It is a matter of right under the Vienna Convention in order to allow these people to have some amount of consular access, so that we will be able to negotiate with the country or present our case for them to reason the situation better. But this was not granted by Pakistan. So India has taken this matter to the UN body, after which justice was done because India was given consular access and so on, and the execution of Mr. Kulbhushan Jadhav has been put on hold. And ever since that particular judgment, the case is developing. It is an ongoing development, and ball by ball commentary comes up from every now and then. So what is relevant for our exam is the concept of Vienna Convention. This Vienna Convention is related to diplomats and other people who are basically acting as a representative of the state of a particular country. When these people undergo a trouble, they basically have certain kind of immunities, they have certain kind of rights, and these rights are granted by Vienna Convention. That is what is relevant for exam from this particular article. Now comes the last article for our discussion. The title for the article is Scramble for Funds as Center Tightens Purse Strings. The syllabus connection has been listed here. The issue is COVID-19 lockdown, and the dimension is the effect of lockdown on the state's finances. Now let's move on to the gist of the article. So what does this article say? This article basically points out to the dire situation that we have in Kerala at the moment. Kerala is basically going through a financial crisis. Why is that the case? Because of lockdown, Kerala has put itself on lockdown restrictions for quite some time now, and it has not been able to generate any economic activity. Now, as we all know, when there is no economic activity, there is no money with people to pay the taxes. So the Kerala government does not have enough money in its treasury or its coffers. So if you look at the incoming and outgoing money at the moment, this Kerala government's treasury has about just 2,000 crores, but the money it is supposed to give is as high as 3,850 crores. In such a situation, where will the money come from in order to bridge this gap is the question which Kerala government is supposed to answer. On one hand, it is trying to raise the money from open market borrowings. It wants to raise that money from the market, but this is not possible because the RBI has cautioned it that this is going to create trouble in the long run. So in order to borrow money from the market, there is some kind of restriction. But on the other hand, is the center giving money? No. The center has basically delayed the money that is being given to Kerala, or in fact, the center has delayed its payments to most of the states in the country. So that is another problem Kerala is facing. And this is what the problem of the government is. But if you look at the people in the MSME sector in Kerala, they are also facing a trouble of their own, because they need finances, they need money at the earliest in order to start their operations. So these MSME sectors work on day-to-day money, right? So this money is not there in the economy, and giving money to these people, this MSME sector, is another trouble which Kerala government is facing. And central government is supposed to support this kind of situation, is what the article says. And on the other hand, Kerala government is trying to build a pressure group in order to create a coalition of states who will pressure the government, who will request the central government to give them some kind of money to handle the situation better. Alright, so this is the discussion for the day. We will meet again. Thank you for your participation.